Air Attack is an arcade game from the shoot 'em up genre, also known as shmups. Released in the early 1990s, this game was part of the wave of vertical scrolling shooters that were popular in arcades during that time. Let's dive into the story, gameplay, and release details of Air Attack. Game concept and mechanics. Air Attack is a vertical scrolling shooter, meaning the action scrolls from the top of the screen to the bottom as the player controls an aircraft moving upwards through enemy territory. The player pilots a combat plane and must shoot down waves of enemy aircraft, tanks, and other military vehicles. The primary objective is to destroy everything in sight, avoid enemy fire, and survive long enough to reach and defeat the stage's boss, usually a large enemy aircraft or tank. The game's controls are simple. The player can move the aircraft in all directions and shoot. While these mechanics are easy to learn, the challenge increases as more enemies appear, firing more projectiles at the player. Power-ups are scattered throughout the game, allowing players to upgrade their weapons, increase the firing rate, or improve their defense by getting shields or extra lives. Key features. Air Attack featured several classic elements that were typical of arcade games from that era. 1. Power-ups. As you shoot down enemies, some of them drop power-ups. These might upgrade your plane's weapons, making them more powerful, or give you special bombs that can clear all enemies on the screen. 2. Challenging levels. Each level gets progressively harder, with more enemies and faster-paced action. The player must learn patterns of enemy movements and attack strategies to survive. 3. Boss battles. At the end of each stage, there's usually a tough boss battle. The bosses are much larger and require more hits to defeat compared to the smaller enemies. 4. High scores. Like many arcade games, Air Attack encouraged players to beat high scores. Players would compete for the top spot on the leaderboard by trying to destroy as many enemies as possible without losing all their lives. Release date. Air Attack was released around 1992, at a time when arcade gaming was still popular, but slowly transitioning as home consoles began to rise in popularity. The arcade machines were coin-operated, meaning players would insert coins to play for a certain amount of time or until they lost all their lives. Games like Air Attack were designed to challenge players enough that they would want to keep putting in more coins to continue playing, trying to beat difficult stages and bosses. The influence of earlier games. Air Attack shares similarities with earlier iconic games like 1942 and Raiden, both of which were influential in the shoot 'em up genre. These games were known for their military themes, vertical scrolling, and the player's control of a combat aircraft. 1942, released by Capcom in 1984, was one of the first big vertical shooters and was set during World War II. In that game, the player controls a fighter plane battling enemy aircraft and warships. The success of games like 1942 paved the way for later titles like Air Attack. Although it didn't become as famous, Air Attack offered similar thrills with fast-paced action, power-ups, and tough boss battles that arcade players loved. Gameplay experience. While Air Attack didn't revolutionize the shoot 'em up genre, it was still an enjoyable experience for players who liked intense action and a simple but satisfying gameplay loop. You control the military plane flying through enemy airspace, shooting down opponents, dodging bullets, and surviving boss fights. The combination of quick reflexes, good aiming, and strategic use of power-ups was essential for success. The difficulty of the game also meant that many players had to practice a lot to progress through the levels. Mastering enemy attack patterns, avoiding obstacles, and keeping an eye out for power-ups made each playthrough a learning experience. One of the most fun aspects of games like Air Attack was the potential for multiplayer co-op mode. Some arcade versions of the game allowed two players to join forces, making it easier to tackle the harder stages and bosses. Playing with a friend also made the game more social and competitive, as both players would compete for a higher score while cooperating to survive longer. Graphics and sound. The graphics in Air Attack were typical for arcade games of the early 90s. The visuals weren't groundbreaking, but they were colorful and clear enough to distinguish enemy units, bullets, and power-ups. The background scrolled continuously to create the illusion of forward motion, and the enemies, though somewhat repetitive, were varied enough to keep things interesting. The sound effects in Air Attack consisted of simple explosions, gunfire, and occasional power-up collection sounds. The music, like many arcade games, was upbeat and energetic, helping to build excitement as players progressed through the levels. Although the sound quality wasn't on par with what you would expect from modern games, it suited the fast-paced action well. Legacy. While Air Attack may not have the same level of fame as games like Galaga or 1942, it is remembered fondly by those who grew up playing arcade games during the late 80s and early 90s. Its straightforward gameplay and challenge kept players coming back for more, feeding the machine with coins as they tried to beat their high scores or just survive one more level. Over the years, the genre evolved and saw new innovations, especially with the rise of home consoles. However, the simple joy of vertical scrolling shooters like Air Attack remains a nostalgic experience for many arcade enthusiasts. The appeal of piloting a fighter plane and shooting down waves of enemies remains timeless in the world of gaming. In more recent times, the name Air Attack has also been used for newer games, including mobile versions that borrow heavily from the classic arcade style. These modern versions bring the same fast-paced shooting action, but with enhanced graphics and more intricate mechanics suited to mobile platforms. Conclusion. Air Attack, released in 1992, is a classic example of the vertical scrolling shoot 'em up genre. It challenged players to navigate through waves of enemies, collecting power-ups and battling bosses. Although it didn't become as famous as some of its predecessors, it was a fun and engaging arcade game that delivered fast-paced action. For those who enjoy the nostalgia of retro arcade gaming, Air Attack offers a glimpse into the golden age of shoot 'em up games, where simple controls and intense gameplay kept players coming back for more. If you liked the video, subscribe, like, and write to me in the comments, what do you want to be the next arcade game that we will learn the story of? Until next time, be well.